World War II. The beginning of World War II. In the late 1930s, many countries were still recovering from World War I. People hoped for peace, but trouble was brewing in Europe. Adolf Hitler, leader of Nazi Germany, had big plans. He wanted to take control of Europe. His goal was to build a powerful empire. In 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. This invasion started World War II. Britain and France declared war on Germany. The war was no longer just a small fight. It became a global conflict. The rise of the Axis powers. Germany, led by Hitler, formed an alliance with Italy and Japan. These countries were called the Axis powers. They wanted to control more land and expand their empires. In 1940, Germany invaded France and many other countries in Europe. Italy also took over parts of Africa. Japan had already started expanding in Asia. They wanted to build an empire in the Pacific. The United States joins the war. At first, the United States stayed out of the war. Many Americans did not want to get involved. But in December 1941, Japan attacked the US naval base at Pearl Harbor. The attack caused great damage. Many American soldiers were killed. In response, the United States declared war on Japan. Soon after, Germany and Italy declared war on the US. The United States was now part of the war. The Battle of Britain. In 1940, Germany tried to invade Britain. Hitler wanted to destroy Britain's air force and control the skies. This battle was called the Battle of Britain. The British Royal Air Force fought hard. They used radar to spot German planes and were able to defeat the German Luftwaffe. It was a big victory for Britain. They showed that they could stand up to Germany. The Eastern Front. Germany didn't stop. In 1941, they attacked the Soviet Union. The Germans were winning at first. But the Soviet winter was harsh. The cold and lack of supplies slowed the German army. One important battle was at Stalingrad. It lasted for months. The Soviets trapped the German army and forced them to surrender. This was a turning point in the war. The Soviet Union began to push Germany back. The war in the Pacific. In the Pacific, Japan was busy expanding its empire. They attacked many countries, including China and the Philippines. But in 1942, the United States won a big victory at the Battle of Midway. The US Navy destroyed most of Japan's aircraft carriers. This was a huge blow to Japan. From then on, the United States started winning more battles in the Pacific. The turning point. D-Day. In 1944, the Allies planned a big attack on Nazi-occupied France. This was called D-Day. On 6 June 1944, thousands of soldiers from Britain, the United States, and other countries landed on the beaches of Normandy. The Germans had strong defenses, but the Allies were determined. It was a risky operation, but it worked. The Allies gained a foothold in France, and the road to defeating Germany began. The liberation of Paris. In August 1944, the Allies reached Paris. The French people celebrated as their city was freed from German control. The Germans were forced to leave. The liberation of Paris was an important victory for the Allies. It showed that they were winning the war. The Battle of the Bulge. In late 1944, Germany launched a surprise attack in Belgium. This battle became known as the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans hoped to split the Allied forces. But the Allies fought back bravely. The battle was long and bloody. In the end, the Allies won. This was the last major German attack in the war. The fall of Germany. By 1945, Germany was losing on all fronts. Soviet forces were advancing from the east. The Allies were pushing from the west. In April 1945, Soviet soldiers entered Berlin. Hitler, seeing that Germany would lose, committed suicide. On 7 May 1945, Germany surrendered. World War II in Europe was over. The war in the Pacific continues. Even though the war in Europe was over, the war in the Pacific was still going on. The United States and Japan were still fighting. The Japanese refused to surrender. The United States wanted to end the war quickly. In August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These bombs caused great destruction. Japan surrendered on 15 August 1945. World War II was finally over. The aftermath of the war. World War II left the world in ruins. Many cities were destroyed. Millions of people had died. The war caused immense suffering. But there were also moments of hope. The Allies worked to rebuild the world after the war. They formed the United Nations in 1945 to promote peace and cooperation among nations. The Holocaust. One of the darkest parts of World War II was the Holocaust. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis targeted Jews, Roma, disabled people, and others. They were sent to concentration camps, where they were killed in large numbers. 6 million Jews died during the Holocaust. The world would never forget the horrors of the camps. The Holocaust showed the importance of standing up against hatred and prejudice. The rise of the United States and the Soviet Union. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union became the world's two superpowers. They had very different ideas about how the world should be run. This led to the Cold War. The US and the Soviet Union competed for power. This rivalry lasted for many years. The United Nations and its role. The United Nations was created after the war. Its goal was to prevent future wars. The UN worked to promote peace, protect human rights, and help people in need. It became an important organization in the post-war world. The end of colonialism. World War II also changed the way countries were ruled. Many nations that had colonies began to fight for their independence. In India, for example, the British gave up control after the war. Many other countries in Asia and Africa gained independence in the years that followed. The war had made it clear that empires were no longer acceptable. The Marshall Plan. To help Europe rebuild, the United States introduced the Marshall Plan. This plan provided financial aid to European countries that had been destroyed by the war. The goal was to help them recover and prevent the spread of communism. The Marshall Plan was a success. It helped rebuild Europe and improved relations between the United States and Western Europe. The legacy of World War II. World War II changed the world forever. It reshaped borders and created new alliances. The war showed the dangers of totalitarianism and unchecked power. It also showed the strength of human resilience. Despite the destruction, people worked hard to rebuild their lives. The war also brought about important changes in technology and society. The use of nuclear weapons. One of the lasting effects of World War II was the development of nuclear weapons. The atomic bombs dropped on Japan changed the way the world saw war. The use of nuclear weapons raised questions about their morality and safety. The world had to come to terms with the fact that a future war could be far more destructive than ever before. The Cold War begins. After the war, the United States and the Soviet Union became the two dominant superpowers. They had different ideas about how to govern the world. The US supported democracy and capitalism, while the Soviet Union supported communism. This led to the Cold War, a period of tension between the two superpowers. The Cold War lasted for nearly 50 years. The beginning of decolonization. After World War II, many countries in Africa and Asia sought independence from European powers. The war weakened the European nations, making it difficult for them to hold on to their colonies. In India, Britain granted independence in 1947. Other countries, such as Indonesia and the Philippines, also gained freedom in the years after the war. The changing world order. World War II caused a dramatic shift in the global balance of power. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the most powerful nations. Europe, once the center of global power, was devastated by the war. Many countries had to rebuild their economies and societies. The rise of the United States and the Soviet Union shaped world politics for the next several decades. The human cost of the war. The human cost of World War II was staggering. More than 60 million people died, including soldiers and civilians. Cities were destroyed, and millions of families lost loved ones. The war left deep scars on the survivors. But despite the suffering, people found ways to rebuild and move forward. The importance of remembering history. It is important to remember the lessons of World War II. The war showed the dangers of hatred, racism, and authoritarianism. It also taught the world about the importance of peace, cooperation, and human rights. By learning from the past, we can work to build a better future for all people.